Everybody. Thanks for having me here tonight. I'll try not to put you to sleep. I almost didn't come because I thought it might be shut down, but what I learned was this part of the library is in fact funded by the Institute, not by the government, so it can continue. It's not shut down, so I'll talk for the full time. Just ask a question, how many of you guys are Kiva lenders? Wow, amazing. Are there any Kiva borrowers in the audience? Yay, let's give them a hand. And on Kiva in the US, we have this thing called trustees, which are people that refer borrowers to the site. So if there's somebody that you believe could use a small business loan at 0% and you believe has good character and can repay the loan, you can refer someone to the site. So we call those trustees. Are there any trustees in the audience? Amazing. Thank you for doing what you do. And just a call to action, if any of you guys have a friend or know somebody that you think could use a small business loan on Kiva, you can do that too. You can become a trustee. One of the reasons I'm here is because of President Clinton, as we mentioned earlier in the night, is actually a funny story. I started Kiva with 2 other people in 2005, and we all went to New York in like 2006 to fundraise. So we were the small nonprofit, 4 staff members in San Francisco. We had no funding, and so we went on our first fundraising trip, and we thought we would raise money from people in New York. So we had this big event, and we invited everyone, friends of friends, everyone we knew, people in the financial industry, investment bankers, and we had this party in Greenwich Village where we gave our first PowerPoint presentation. So as people entering business plan competitions and trying to raise money from foundations, we made these charts and graphs and business plans about the ROI and the sort of the repayment rate and how it's going to scale and the costs and the ratios and everything, very financial. And we presented this at a cocktail party in Greenwich Village at like 9 p.m. And I think it was just crickets. It's like one of those presentations where no one smiles, no one looks back, no one nods their head, thank you very much, which I appreciate. And it was a complete dud, and we absolutely raised no money. But one thing that was funny is my friend and I, my co-founder Premal and I, got to talking to a woman sort of at the door on her way out, and it turned out to be President Clinton's secretary. And then we used that occasion to sort of convince her to invite us to the Clinton Global Initiative event in a few months. And so we got invited to CGI. And then President Clinton found out about us and then wrote about us in his book. And then a few months later, he invited us to be on Oprah at the launch of his book. And basically, Kiva was just a few thousand users up until that point. And then, of course, when you get on Oprah, you sort of just get overwhelmed with traffic. And I've just been busy and tired ever since. That was 2007. Okay, so I'm here to share a little bit about Kiva, and maybe we could have a discussion, more importantly, and then listen to the other speakers who are all fabulous. So I'm going to start off by just showing a small video about Kiva's work in Arkansas, which is very, very new for us. So let's cue the video.
My name is Josh Hardin.
And I am Anna Hardin, and this is our daughter, Miriam Hardin.
And we are the owners and co-founders of Laughingstock Farm, which is here in Sheridan, Arkansas. We are applying for a $10,000 loan to help us with our irrigation and also to help us bring solar power to our farm. The input cost of electricity and water are the 2 biggest expenses. And so for us to cut that cost in any way is a big deal. I think the Kiva Zip model really brings a unique opportunity, not just for growers, but for our community who need to be connected with funding sources. We have a very difficult time obtaining money through conventional sources like banks, and they require large amounts of capital and down payment and titles to vehicles and just
high interest.
High interest and not flexible terms, and they have no investment in us. I think another important aspect is being able to be connected with the trustee who understands who our business is. And Canis, the Central Arkansas New Agrarian Society, is a small group of growers and new and beginning farmers, and they've really been open and receptive to what I'm doing. I'm not a beginning farmer. I have some experience, but it's been that information exchange that we've had at Canis that has really created a good relationship. And for them to step forward as a trustee really means a lot. I mean, it means that they believe we can do this, and that is just as important as the community saying they believe we can do this. And having a trustee to back us and give us, that little bit of confidence really goes a long way. And it also puts the pressure on us to push through. We have tough times. We really will remember that those people believe in us, and that we've got to, this has got to work. We've got to find new and inventive ways to make it work.
Talk about in a bit, I started Kiva in Uganda in 2005, and I did customer service for the first 4 years, so up until around 2009. And the main complaint I got from you guys, from people using our site, was, why aren't you working in my neighborhood? Why aren't you working? I know somebody that could use help in my backyard. Can we fund this person? And so it took us a long time, but we're finally able to work here, and we're really, really scaling, especially in Arkansas. We gave about 41 loans in the last 7 months here. So it's really exciting for us to be working here, and it's not as much of a poverty alleviation story here. It's more of a job creation story and a small business story in the U.S. About 2/3 of all jobs are created by small businesses. So it's a really, really important way to drive job creation in the U.S. And if every single small business in the U.S. created one job, we would have full employment easily in the U.S. So it's a big challenge, and banks don't necessarily lend to people like this. So it's really, really great work. Okay, so I'm going to start just by telling my story for a few minutes, and then talk about some other issues in microfinance in general, and then we can have a discussion. Okay, so hopefully this works. All right, so I don't know if you guys saw this. Kiva was on The Simpsons a little while ago. Lisa Simpson heard about microfinance from this Bangladeshi guy over YouTube. The Bangladeshi guy, that's Professor Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, championed a lot by the Clintons, actually. And then she was so moved by seeing him speak that she ended up making a loan to Nelson in her neighborhood, who proceeded to take the loan and not pay it back at all. But it was a good exposure for Kiva, despite the bad experience Lisa Simpson had. It was good exposure for Kiva because we're trying to sort of get this practice of 0% interest lending and charity and generosity baked into the mainstream activity of everybody. And so it was a good chance for us to get the word out. I heard this guy speak, the Bangladeshi professor Muhammad Yunus, at Stanford University when I was just out of college. So I graduated from college in 2001. I'd always wanted to do something in international development, but I always wanted to be an entrepreneur as well. And I was at this time in my life where I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was working at TiVo as a computer programmer. That's a TV device. Our mission was to help people pause live TV. And I was doing that every day for about 3 years, and I was really restless. I wanted to start a business. I wanted to do something good for the world. I would go to talks like this and see people speak, and I heard him speak about microfinance and his history lending to women one village at a time in Bangladesh, and how moving that was for him, and how people told him he couldn't do it, yet he did it time after time again. And he was lending to low-income, illiterate women who proved the banks wrong. And he ended up starting the Grameen Bank, which is one of the biggest microfinance banks in the world now, and is purely owned by women business owners. A real inspiration. And so I thought, hey, this guy is an entrepreneur. He's doing business, but he's also doing good. So he's a social entrepreneur, and I want to do something like that. So I took a trip. I went to Uganda, took some time off from my time helping people pause live TV at TiVo, and I volunteered with a small micro bank out on the eastern part of the state, of the country, in this town called Mbale. And there I was doing impact analysis with my co-founders, and we were sort of interviewing people at the time they took a loan and also after they took a loan. And you can't necessarily ask people to see their tax returns, or you can't ask for their net worth. And so we're doing things like asking people questions, like, turns out, do you take sugar with your tea? That's an important question to ascertain someone's level of wealth in that part of the world. Or do you have a mattress? Is also a really important indicator of status and wealth. And what I noticed was it was really fun. So for me, it was a really, really inspiring time. I went to that part of the world thinking it would be a story of oppression and poverty, and it'd be really, really hard and sad, and I'd have to get ready for it. But in fact, no, it was really, really uplifting. I had wanted to be an entrepreneur too. So back home I had all sorts of business ideas, and I was thinking of one business idea every day and workshopping it and writing business plans and whatnot. And I found myself talking about my business ideas with people like Petronilla. This woman had an idea to sell sort of airtime cards at her store in Uganda. And with that small profit, she was able to send her kids to school and not have to make trade-offs between putting food on the table and buying medicine. Malaria is a big problem in that part of the world. School uniforms are important, school fees, et cetera. So I just got excited trading business ideas with business people like her. So, of course, being a guy with a lot of ideas, I had the idea for Kiva. Essentially, the concept was this could be a more adult version of child sponsorship. So instead of writing letters to a child halfway across the world, why don't you lend to an adult halfway across the world? And instead of being over paper, it could be on the internet. So that was the concept I had, and I wanted to try it out with a few people. And so these are the first 6 borrowers on Kiva. They all decided to take a risk and to do it with us. So that guy on the right is a goat herder. He buys and sells goats. There's a restaurant owner in there. There's a woman who buys and sells used clothing, so like Salvation Army, sort of American used clothing on the side of the street. The Super Bowl loser who lost the Super Bowl, but it says they won on the shirt. And this woman in the middle there, her name's Elizabeth, and she's actually the very first borrower on our website. So if you go home and go on Kiva, you can sort oldest to new, and she'll be at the top, still in the database. And she took a loan to buy a refrigerator, actually a freezer, and also to buy a bunch of fish. So she was a fish seller. They call it a fishmonger in that part of the world. And so she sold about 3 or 4 fish on the side of the street, and we gave her a $500 loan to buy lots of fish and then put them in the freezer. And so if you buy things in bulk, of course you can get the price down and you can make a better profit. People understand these concepts. They're very simple. People just don't have capital. The markets aren't very efficient in most parts of the world. Efficient. Uh-oh. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. So the markets aren't very efficient, meaning even if you have an obvious idea, like instead of buying 3 fish, buy 5 fish, you can't do it because you don't have the investment, even if it's a great business idea. So we thought the internet could rush in and fill this need, and people from around the world could fund these loans, and then they could pay back. So we put her on the site, and she got funded when we launched in April of 2005, and she got funded by my dad and my co-founder's dad as the first 2 funders on the top. So she got her loan and paid it back within a few months, and it was just a really, really exciting time. So at this time, I was still coding. I was still working at TiVo again, and I was just doing this on nights and weekends. So by night, for a long period, I would manage sort of this operation in Africa, manage this small staff that I was employing all night, and then I would go to work by the day and program computers, and I would come back and repeat the same madness, super, super tired for almost a year and a half doing this. But it was also really inspiring because I found I was doing something I loved, and it was just energized my whole part of my life. At my day job, I actually got a promotion during this time. I was working on the Comcast DVR, if any of you guys have that. I helped make that. So I was doing these 2 things, and both things were benefiting because I was doing something I liked. And if any of you do something you really like, you know that it actually expands your capacity to get more done. And you're not counting the hours trying to go to lunch and trying to go to home. You want to stay longer, but your whole life gets better because even in your relationships, they see that you're more joyful because you're doing something you love. So I recommend it. But then I tried to make it a business. So I had this idea, okay, let's try to write a business plan. Let's talk to all the right people and try to make it work. Let's be serious about it. And I heard all sorts of feedback. So into this period of getting lots of feedback, I went to Sand Hill Road. Anyone ever been to Sand Hill Road? Sorry I say that, but that's a Bay Area thing. It's like this road where there's all the venture capitalists, all the entrepreneurs go to get funding. So I went up and down that road, and people said, that's not really a business. You can't make a business off of lending to poor people. It's not scalable. And then I went to foundations, not the Rockefeller Foundation, but other foundations. I wrote 40 letters to different foundations. None of them got back to me. And people generally said, that's not a charity. Foundations shouldn't fund that work. That's a business. But everyone that I tried to raise venture capital from said that's not a business. Also, people said it was illegal. Like, there's all these securities laws. So I started learning about the SEC and the IRS and Homeland Security and all these issues around international lending and investing and currencies. And whoa, it started to get really complicated, and I didn't know how I was going to make it work. One thing I did was I just decided to take off the interest rates. So instead of making an investment, I just made it a 0% interest loan. And it didn't seem like anyone would want to stop that, because it's not really like the stock market. It's not something you could have a Ponzi scheme doing. It's just something very simple. So we made it a 0% interest charitable concept, and we just started it. I had 5 of my friends join me, and initially we were volunteers. I had a really, really good fashion sense at that time. Thank you for laughing. That's an owl shirt. It's a sweater with an owl on it. And I actually shrunk that sweater, put it in the dryer, so I can't wear it anymore. But I was a really nerdy guy, you know, wearing nerdy clothes. But 5 of my friends joined me and started doing this as a volunteer, and then able to pay this guy's rent, and this other guy sleeping on my couch. And eventually we have some revenue because our users start donating to us online. One time our server crashed for 4 days, and then that was actually the best fundraising event because we put a button on our site that says, help us get our server back up. And then on that weekend when it crashed, we raised $100,000. And so finally able to rent an office and finally able to pay somebody's rent and sort of get something going. And it was a really, really fun time in San Francisco. So then we started spreading to other countries. So people all around the world started writing us and said, I could use that website to raise money in my neighborhood. So we set up little operations where we would partner with an organization. So in this woman's case, she's connected to a small NGO in Kenya who lends to Maasai cattle women. And we would send the money to their bank account, and they would take it out and disperse it to the cattle women. And then as the cattle woman pays it back, they would pay back the loan to me via wire transfer in San Francisco. And so I started accounting for all this money, going two ways from US to Kenya and back, and then started working in other countries. We even spread outside of Africa, and so this is like 2007, we started working in war-torn places like Afghanistan and Iraq. One thing that's really cool that we found out is that our lenders really care to lend in places where there's a lot of risk. So we work in Somalia, for instance, and our lenders love it. They want to fund places that are at risk, that they view could really use the help of this kind of investment capital for women primarily. And so working in places like Afghanistan, even though it was with a man borrowing, it became really popular on the site because our users are attracted to risk. And so I started to notice this is sort of the inverse of regular investment behavior. The more risky, the more investment. And the lower the return, the more money. So it was really, really interesting. And so we eventually expanded this idea to about 60 countries on 5 continents. And so because of this outpouring of demand from all over the world, we're now working in many, many developing countries and many more to go. We even work in the US, as we just mentioned, which is not a developing country. Then it became very social. So we added a big social component, and if anyone wants to talk about sort of social media and philanthropy, something I've studied a lot and thought about a lot and kind of understand the underlying dynamics. They're not rational, so in this case, there's a group of women that just lends to men without shirts on our site. Don't ask me why. But it's not an investment behavior, in other words. It could be. And we even have local lending. So we have a team, Arkansas, for instance, 48 team members. So not everyone here. You guys should join. Go home and join. They need help. The biggest two teams on our site are the Christians and the atheists. So it's a diverse group. It can appeal to left wing, can appeal to right wing. There's no one that really can argue with helping people start businesses. And we even have other animals. So not only humans lend on Kiva. We have cats. So one thing is people post up the pictures of their cats, and this cat, lends. He's one of the biggest lenders on the site. Actually, the biggest lender in the last few years is a dog on the site now. Can you believe it? So other animals really, other species really care. We have this weird thing going on where really, part of our mission is to connect people. And so what we do is we go into the field, and if the borrowers are like Maasai cattlewomen, for instance, don't use the internet. We send fellows out there like Mitchell, but fellows in other parts of the world go out there with pictures of all the lenders and say, there's a group of people around the world that care about you. There's a group of people that support you. And it's a really, really powerful thing. People want to pay back their loan fast so that the people that lent to them can help someone else. So they're actually paying back out of generosity, not necessarily fear, hopefully. But in this case, when you show a picture of a cat and say this cat's lent to you, our borrower out in Kenya said, why do I have to pay back that cat? And I guess the fellow really had no good reason. It's hard to say why. I just have a few more minutes. I'll just talk a little bit about the future. One thing we're trying to do is work in parts of microfinance that really generate income. A lot of microfinance can just serve as like consumption smoothing loans, and that's something we're trying to get out of, and we're trying to get into more productive uses for loans. So one of the causes that we really care about and we think that there's a lot of hope for is sanitation. So all over the world there's slums outside of capital cities full of people that don't really use toilets because they can't, because they're not around. So instead they often have to go to the bathroom in a ravine or in the stream. And there's a bunch of organizations all around the world that are promoting a movement to bring clean sanitation to slums. So this is a slum in Kenya called Makuru, and this guy operates this toilet. It's called a Fresh Life toilet, and he got it with the help of a $700 loan from Kiva, and he charges about 3 cents per flush. And so if someone uses that toilet, they willingly pay, and it's very, very popular. People would much rather do that than go to the bathroom in the stream. And so he's able to actually run a profitable business, and it's helping the community. And so it's an example of a microfinance loan that's for an asset, not necessarily for consumption purposes. Another similar loan like that, I just got back from Kenya, so all my examples are from Kenya. I recently met these guys. They're planting trees, and so they got a $1,500 loan to plant eucalyptus seedlings. And this is in a very dry, arid part of Kenya on the coast, north of Mombasa, where not much grows. So it's arid land, but they can grow these trees. And the trees actually take 10 years to grow to be the size of a telephone pole. And they can sell each telephone pole for about $150. So our lenders lent to them 122-month loans. So if you look on the bottom right, it's 122 months for this loan. And so they literally will get paid back when this tree becomes a telephone pole, which apparently can happen in 122 months. So the cool thing about crowdfunding and Kiva in particular is that the lenders are very, very patient, and they're able to take incredible risk. Who knows if this tree is going to become a telephone pole? Warren Buffett probably would not invest in this, but the return is amazing in terms of changing people's lives. And our lenders are willing to do that. They're waiting oftentimes 10 years for trees and tuition loans and things like that. The last innovation I'll talk about is, or the second to last, is mobile lending. So all over the world, mobile payment systems are spreading much faster than banking systems. And so cell phone lending, cell phone saving is spreading much more fast than microfinance lending and microfinance saving right now. It's this big disruption that's happened only in the last 3 to 5 years. And it's really changing the face of microfinance. No longer will you be seeing sort of group meetings of women like in the Grameen Bank. People will just be borrowing and saving on their phones at their home, for better or for worse. It will save borrowers a lot of money and will introduce the first safe savings account to the world. And so about a year ago, we started tapping into this dynamic also in Kenya. We lent to this guy, straight from our San Francisco office to him, $150 to buy a wheelbarrow. And so he just has a transportation service, a courier service throughout the town. And he paid back the loan via text message. And so it hits our office, hits our computer in San Francisco via SMS. We made a mistake of sending him an SMS every time he got funded. And so every time he received $25, he'd get a message every single time. What we realized was because of the time zone difference, that would wake him up a lot at night. So we had to sort of digest that. Another thing we did was we're giving our borrowers virtual goods. Like in this case, he got a gold medal badge for paying back the loan on time. It's like a video game. And he got a message saying, thanks for paying back your loan. You got a gold medal on our site. And then he wrote back saying, okay, when does it arrive? So that was another cultural mistake. And so I'll end really quick talking about our work in Arkansas and in the US. We started working here in March, thanks to President Clinton. We've done an okay job so far. There's a lot of hope, and the borrowers in this room are really helping create jobs, they're helping grow their business, and they're helping sort of prove to our community that US borrowers can pay back, and then growing that system as well. So we have about 40 loans funded for about $200,000. And 26 trustees like y'all in the room have referred people to the site. We have about a 95% repayment rate. So it's a good start. Considering that Arkansas, I read, had about 60 microloans a year before this, 40 in 1 month is a pretty good start. So there's a lot of promise. Banks aren't lending to small businesses that are unproven in general. It's really hard if any of you guys want to start a business and you just have an idea, you don't have an asset, you don't have a contract. Good luck getting a bank loan. Really, really hard in this country since the credit freeze. So our lenders don't mind taking a 5% loss to help somebody. And so I'll just end one of my favorite borrowers is a spoken word artist. She couldn't make it tonight. Her name is Hardin. But she got a $1,000 loan to, she got a $500 loan, and then she got a $1,000 loan after she paid back her first loan to pay for CDs and production, microphone equipment, and she's coming to our holiday party this year. She's an amazing artist. So it's a plug for June. If you guys need a spoken word artist who's really incredibly, superbly talented, would recommend hiring her. So I'll end with that, and do we have a Q&A next? Okay. So we can have a Q&A if you wish. What is a question?
A couple of years ago, I heard some statistics about the dramatic impact that it had in reducing poverty just in general by use of microloans. Do you have any more recent statistics on that? It was shocking to me when I heard how much poverty had been decreased by the loans.
Well, I think the answer is not great statistics, to be honest. I have great statistics about the reach of microfinance. Certainly it's growing very, very fast, probably like 20% a year all over the world. It's pretty much in every country, and the repayment rates are universally very high. I think microfinance has a lot of problems as well. In general, the industry, sometimes people make the mistake of lending too much to people who aren't ready to borrow. That's one of the main problems, as well as funding. In many places, it can just serve as a palliative, which isn't wrong, but it's not necessarily a poverty alleviation dynamic. So oftentimes it can just like play the role of a credit card for people that need smoothing of their income, but not necessarily fund sort of productive use, which is a problem we're trying to solve. We're also trying to bring the cost down. So the interest rates can be high because it's so inefficient in terms of hands-on visiting. We really think technology can bring it down. And so in terms of statistics, there's a lot of mixed studies out there. If you take the industry as a whole and just group it all together, there's a lot of microfinance institutions doing great work and that can prove they're alleviating poverty, but there's a lot of them sort of not making a difference either. So it's hard to generalize about the whole thing. If you email me, I can send you the study. So my email address is matt@kiva.org, and we can go back and forth. I can send you the detailed work on both sides of the debate.
I think there's a question in the back.
Thank you. Of the many countries that you're in, is there a short list of countries that you feel like you're having the most impact?
That's a great, I would say, because we have an office and because we started out in East Africa, all the East African countries like Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania are probably first and foremost for us. We just have the most history there, and we're innovating the most there with mobile payments and all these things I mentioned, like the tree loans and student loans and stuff like that. So I would put East Africa at the top of our list.
Another question? Oh, here we are, right over here.
Hi, I'm Mattia Fleischner. I'm part of the Clinton School here. I'm class 9. And I was interested, you spoke about the countries where you've had a lot of success. I noticed you weren't in Argentina. And of course, you know, there are a lot of other countries and places to touch. But I wanted to see if you could speak a little bit more about what challenges you faced as far as like potentially the trading and or wiring of money to Argentina, which sometimes can be challenging, and also language barriers that might be challenging with some of your borrowers, and maybe other challenges that you guys have faced through the process.
That's such an interesting question, yeah. As we expanded along this journey, we realized that some countries were a lot easier to work in and to start partnering with organizations in than others. Argentina would be one of the harder ones for us, and that's why we don't currently work there. The reasons for this are often the laws around currency outflows. And so most countries will allow you to send money into the country, but a lot of them have a big process and a lot of red tape around repatriating the currency. And so some of the hardest ones to work in for us have been India, China, Brazil, Argentina, Russia, sort of emerging market countries. And it makes sense because those countries are really growing and they're trying to get a hold of their currency and sort of reduce the volatility as they grow. I've learned a lot about central banks and I've visited a lot of central banks in different countries, and it's just a fascinating thing to see what really happens when you wire money to a place and then someone wires it back. Sometimes you don't get it back, and they claim they wired it and you're not getting it. And this has happened a few times in like Mozambique and Tanzania, and it boils down to going to the central bank and asking, where's the money? And sometimes they actually have it on a form in the bank, and there's a guy that has to stamp that form to send the money out of the country. So in between every wire transfer, there's a manual piece of paper and a human that signs and stamps the form. And if the guy doesn't want to sign the form, you don't get the money. It's gone. Who knows where it went?
I think we have a question over here.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the length of the loan cycle? And then secondly, do you lend to nonprofits that also generate and earn revenue?
Would you mind elaborating on the first question? Sorry, so the loan cycle.
It seems like you're pretty intense in working with your borrowers. How long does it take to get a loan?
Oh, okay. How long does it take to get a loan? Yeah. Not long. Hopefully, we're trying to make it as fast as possible. So in the U.S., you need someone to endorse you, and especially somebody that's already on the site, because then they're already approved. If they're not on the site, then that endorser has to be approved as well. And so we have remote due diligence, so from our office in San Francisco, we'll ask you all sorts of questions, verify identity, and try to do that really fast and then put you on the site. And then you have to fundraise, so not every single borrower gets funded as well. And so then you have to wait for the millions of people on the website to decide to fund you for whatever irrational reason they want to fund you. But about 97% of all of our borrowers have been funded, so it almost always gets funded eventually. Did you have a second question about nonprofits and revenue streams?
Would you wait for the microphone?
I'm sorry, I keep forgetting.
No, I asked you. Thanks.
Do you lend to nonprofits that are involved in activities that might generate revenue that could in fact repay a loan?
Yeah, well, we've done that several times. So, yeah, we've had several nonprofit micro businesses on the site. Definitely, it's a common case. I sponsored a nonprofit in my part of the San Francisco called Old School Cafe, which is a nonprofit but employs youth that are often ex-gang members as the staff, the waiters and the cook staff and whatnot. And they're a nonprofit, but they have a revenue stream, meaning it's a restaurant. And so they paid back their loan. It's really fun. Get to go there and have a good meal.
Sure.
What percentage of your lenders actually reinvest the money back to the borrowers after they've been paid back versus taking that money back for themselves?
Yeah, Emily asked, what percentage of our lenders relend? Great question. We've seen almost every lender relend, almost all the time. So it'd be like 93%. Just keep lending. Typically, they lend and they just relend the same money until it's nothing. So they might do that for a few years. We have a problem of getting lenders to repurchase, meaning to put more money in. And so that's sort of a flaw in our model is the typical user puts a bunch of money in and then their behavior just degrades over 5 to 10 years. And so we have to get new lenders to keep it growing. That's a problem.
Right over there.
Hey, Matt. My name is Hunter Riley. I work for a company called SoFi out of San Francisco. So I'm interested in peer-to-peer lending. Has Kiva thought in any way to expand its model or evolve its model to something like a Kickstarter, since you're doing more, like I can invest in someone here in Arkansas and get a piece of the project in return as compared to my money back?
Great question, and I love SoFi. You guys are doing really, really well. I've been following your progress. Seems like you're going really fast. So one thing we're experimenting with is the U.S. Part of our program, like here in Little Rock. The borrowers are sort of talking directly to the lenders and raising money directly from them, and we send the money via PayPal. So in some cases, it's a lot like Kickstarter. It has that crowdfunding dynamic where the borrowers raise money for themselves. We don't have the feature where you can get repaid in stuff, but maybe we should. That's a great idea. So I wonder if instead of, so with that farm, for instance, they could pay you back in produce instead of money. And I wonder if our lenders would like that. I'm also interested in the produce being a return. So I can't offer interest rate return, but one thing I'm trying to work on with some lawyers right now is getting like an in-kind return. So you get paid back in money, and then you get hamburger on top, or a coupon for something on top of the money. So it's like an interest rate that you can eat. I just made that up. Wow. Eat it.
Right back there.
Hi, Matt. My name's Macy. I was just wondering what the difference is between Kiva and Kiva Zip, because on Kiva, I am a lender, but I'm a borrower on Kiva Zip.
Wow. That's confusing.
Yeah, I know.
It's a nightmare.
It isn't. It was
Company
initially.
Has a problem. It's a marketing department sucks.
But then, when you get repaid on Kiva, can you use that to lend on Kiva Zip?
Yeah, so the history is, so the quick answer is Kiva.org is the system that works with microfinance banks all around the world in 60 countries. It's the model that I described for most of my presentation, where a small bank in Kenya raises money for the cattle women in that neighborhood, and then we send the money to the small bank, which then uses it to fund the loans of the cattle herders. And so that's the primary Kiva. About a year and a half ago, I started Kiva Zip. Why did I do that? Because I wanted to figure out a way to save borrowers more money because those small banks charge interest rates. And so it's trying to basically charge zero to the borrower, as well as connect the lender and borrower directly so they could talk, because connection is really important. So I started at 2 countries, Kenya and US, the 2 countries that I felt were most able to sort of pay money back electronically without anyone in the middle. And so we're lending money directly via PayPal or phones in Kenya. But it's created a nightmare, an organizational nightmare inside the company. So the way I did it was I started a startup, like a 5-person startup within my own company, and tasked them with the task of competing with the rest of the company, which is a really interesting dynamic when you're at, within a nonprofit. Hard to manage that. And then also from a marketing standpoint, it creates confusion, just like you experienced. We tied the 2 systems together so you can transfer money back and forth. You can use the same money on both.
I think we had another question over here too.
Hi, I'm Sandra Leyva. Do you notice in Arkansas in particular and the U.S. in general, you mentioned people say the number 1 complaint is, why don't you have one here? Now that you do have some in America, do you notice a lot of the funding coming within the same state of the borrowers, or do you just see it spread out like any other crowdfunding does?
Yeah. And I might want to mention that the number 1 complaint we receive now is, why are you working in the U.S.? So it's about 50-50 on our website, actually. Half the users don't like it. But what was your question? Sorry, I blanked. Pulled a Governor Perry
Wait
moment.
for the microphone.
Governor Perry moment.
How much of the funding comes from local?
Yeah, how much is local?
Yeah.
So each borrower on average has been able to successfully recruit via email 5 lenders. And so that's one reason why we're interested in the U.S. is because the borrowers can raise money from their own community, and then that's new money in the system, which can then help the whole system. So the answer is it happens about 5 lenders for each borrower. They're not always in the same geographic region. One thing I've also noticed is that your social graph on the internet is not necessarily the same as your geographic. Like, I talk to my mom every day, but she's not my friend over on Facebook. So the internet and real life is not the same.
I think we have time for one more question. I think we have one over here.
So how often do borrowers reborrow? And do you think that that is a sign of growth for these small businesses, or do you think that it's a sign of there's a problem for these small businesses?
Great question. So most of my data comes from microfinance and our partners in general that we work with. And what we notice in microfinance developing world context, that almost all the borrowers are on many cycles of loans. And so typically, imagine it's an agricultural loan. You will get a loan to purchase seeds and fertilizer once a year. And then you have one harvest a year as well. And so you need loans every time you do a harvest so that you can fund that harvest, because you don't have income at that time of year. And so what happens is every year borrowers are taking slightly larger loans. Banks are extending them slightly larger amounts of credit every year. And that's sort of a very universal dynamic. And to answer your question about poverty, one thing you see is borrowers are slowly improving their standard of living every year their entire life. And so they're crawling out of poverty little by little, 10% better every year for 40 years. And it's not a rags to riches story. So in general, that's a good thing. It's not that they're dependent on loans. It's just that they need financing for their business, which is growing, but it's growing slowly.
Well, I hope you will join me in thanking Matt Flannery.